State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live. State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live. Stay tuned.
The Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria is one of such condemnable acts of terror. We have continued to deploy human and military intelligence in close collaboration with our partners to bring an end to their nefarious activities. Greater regional cooperation in intelligence gathering and control of insurgents will ensure not only Nigeria's security, but also the security of our neighbors. A great threat to our collective human and national security is the rising menace of the use of small arms and light weapons. Out of the 500 million illegal small arms and light weapons in the world, an estimated 100 million are in Africa, with ECOWAS taking about 10% of this, and this in the hands of non-state actors. Africa has had enough of wars, and the cost of wars and insurgencies are too high. It has been estimated that Africa loses $18 billion per year from wars as well as insurgencies. We must remain vigilant and look into our peculiar situation in Africa and identify critical factors that belies the extremism and terrorism that threatens our collective security. The enemies of the state today in Africa are often faceless, driven by religious extremism, ethnic mistrust, and rivalries, and propagandas of hate. Their nefarious actions are not limited to any single country, and no one is immune. Therefore, as leaders, we also must change our approach and work more closely together to confront and defeat terrorists and purveyors of hate. Terrorists do not respect borders or boundaries. And I always say that our new security architecture must recognize the fact that the terrorists and trans-border criminals don't respect our boundaries and our borders. Our law enforcement agencies have to respect our international boundaries. There must be a compromise on this if we will effectively rout out criminality and trans-border crimes. While we respect our national boundaries, terrorists move in and out of our borders. It's now time that we agree as African leaders that acts of terror against one nation is an act of terror against all nations. We must not allow our countries to become safe havens for terrorists. We must cooperate maximally in better managing our political boundaries. We should adopt protocols that allow countries to pursue terrorists well into their safe havens in other nations. While we cannot redefine our borders, we must redefine our collective approach to ending trans-boundary terrorism and insurgencies. Africa faces a huge challenge with youth population bulge. By 2050, it is projected that about 40% of the population of Africa will be made up of young people below the age of 15. While about 60% of the population will be made up of young people below the age of 25 years. And of course, we know the culture of Africa, where we take care of our children until they are fully grown. Children below the age of 25, most of them are still unmarried and at the tutelage of and the control of their parents. That means that 40% of our population will be taking care of 60%. This will be a major challenge for all of us. The major concern is the high level of unemployment among the youth, especially those that are educated and skilled. No priority for human security is more important for African countries than a sharp focus on creating jobs for this teeming young population. Skill acquisition, entrepreneurship, development, encouraging the youth to go into agriculture as a business and providing them with access to cheaper financing to fulfill their dreams are all needed to harness unleash the power of our youth to secure our collective future. To foster this, we need to further strengthen intra-African trade to create jobs. Africa must add value to its primary products and commodities to ensure that wealth is created on the continent. This will create wider scope for prosperity for our populations. We must address the issues of inequality. There is no doubt that Africa is growing and our economies are among some of the fastest growing in the world. But this growth is not creating enough impact in terms of improving the living standards of our people. We need inclusive growth that can stimulate broader shared prosperity among our citizens. Social policies that improve access to food, water, housing, and education are crucial for inclusive growth and social participation.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
Hello. Welcome to this side of time. Welcome. This is State Affairs. On Tuesday, we traced the political origins of Boko Haram. We talked about how Ali Modu Sharif's desperation for power led him to make a pact with a radical cleric named Muhammad Yusuf. We talked about how Yusuf's followers made their point. We mentioned the extrajudicial execution of Muhammad Yusuf and how it transformed a localized movement into a full-blown insurgency, an insurgency that has consumed tens of thousands of lives. On Tuesday's edition of State Affairs, we examined Sharif's broken promises, his dismissal of vulnerable youths as very useful during elections only. We talked about the damning evidence presented by a former Borno State Attorney General who concluded that Sharif's desperation for power, Sharif's arrogance is what led to the violence of the Boko Haram insurgents. In that edition, we could not explore the dimensions that explain how Boko Haram grew from a small sect into an army of thousands, and how the insurgency turned on itself in a bloody civil war that ultimately consumed its own leader. Today, we will cover those dimensions. First, we will examine the Almajiri question. The Almajiri question. The ancient Islamic educational system that has been corrupted, producing millions of destitute children who are abandoned by both their families and the state. These children, forced to beg on the streets, living in appalling poverty, became the perfect recruits for an extremist ideology that offered them food and purpose. As a 2025 study published in the African Journal of Peace and Conflict finds that there is a strong ideological and operational nexus between the Almajiri system and Boko Haram. After exploring that dimension, we will turn to the war within Boko Haram. The war within. The bloody civil war between JAS and Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP. That is the war within. Hey, this is the story of how a disagreement over how to treat civilians, whether to massacre Muslims or tax them, led to a civil conflict that would ultimately consume Abubakar Shekau. You remember him? Abubakar Shekau, the man who inherited Yusuf's rage and transformed it into a global terror network. We will trace the assault on Shekau's base in the Sambisa forest. We will come to the final moments of Abubakar Shekau. And through it all, we will keep returning to the central question that this edition and the one before it is addressing. What is the legacy of Ali Modu Sharif, a former governor of Borno State? How did Ali Modu Sharif, who made a deal with the devil in 2003, escape accountability for the devastation that followed? How? This is State Affairs. Today, we complete the story of how political ambition, broken promises, and the abandonment of millions of children created a monster that still terrorizes Nigeria. Welcome to this edition, entitled The Making of a Monster. Almajiri, Shekau, and the War Within. Let's dig into the story. So, having introduced you to where we stopped on Tuesday, on Thursday, we dig deeper. The political origin of Boko Haram is known if you listened to the last edition. The Almajiri question. It is a vital element of the story. The Almajiri system. To explain Boko Haram's recruitment machine, we must understand the Almajiri. I am talking about an ancient Islamic tradition dating back to the 11th century in Kanem, Borno, and later replicated in the Sokoto Caliphate after the triumph of the jihad led by Sheikh Othman Dan Fodio. What that system did is to send young boys from their rural homes to urban centers to study the Quran under a renowned teacher. The term Almajiri comes from the Arabic al-Muhajirun, meaning those who migrate for knowledge. In its original form, young male students would travel from their home to study under Islamic scholars, viewing this educational migration as both noble and spiritually beneficial. But the system has been corrupted. A 2025 study titled Exploring the Almajiri System as a Recruitment Base for the Boko Haram terrorist group in Nigeria, published in the African Journal of Peace, makes some solid point. The study says a strong ideological and operational nexus between the Almajiri system and Boko Haram, with Boko Haram exploiting Almajiri's disdain for Western education to recruit foot soldiers. The study finds a strong ideological and operational nexus between the Almajiri system and Boko Haram, with Boko Haram exploiting the Almajiri's disdain for Western education to recruit foot soldiers. So what we see today is a system that has produced millions of out-of-school children in northern Nigeria. These children are sent away from their families and placed in the care of malams who are often themselves desperately poor, underfunded, and overcrowded. These informal schools provide meager education and even more meager living conditions. The children are forced to beg on the streets for alms to survive. They live in conditions of appalling poverty, inadequate shelter, insufficient nutrition, limited healthcare access, and educational resources confined largely to basic Qurani memorization. The study concludes that the Almajiri system has over the years constituted the recruitment base for the violent groups in northern Nigeria. The relationship exacerbates insecurity and hinders Nigeria's sustainable development by fueling terrorism, increasing illiteracy, and diverting resources from development to counter-terrorism efforts, the reports conclude. So, what does that recruitment look like? Paint a picture. A child from the age of 4 is sent out to live with a malam. The parents are in the know. The child begins to cater for himself. That's the picture. When you create poverty in a system, you create violence. Poverty is equal to violence. To stop violence, you must tackle poverty. To tackle poverty, you must educate the mind. A handshake sealed a bargain. A politician's fevered dream. The cleric brought his followers, and the man who wants to be governor brought his gold. They traded souls for ballots. A story centuries old. "Leave them," said the governor. "They are useful to the state. Those boys who hog the patrol, those children at the gate. When election comes calling, they will turn the tide for me. Leave them." But promises are fragile, I hope you know. Like morning mist, promises fade. The Sharia that was promised became a debt unpaid. It is the story of Ali Modu Sharif. It is the story of Borno State. We are talking about Almajiri. All right. Let's start this conversation. I'm going to bring in a man who went through the Almajiri system. He will create a broader understanding of the subject. I'm talking about Mahmoud. Mahmoud is a journalist that covers Boko Haram. He has a deep understanding of events around the Lake Chad Basin. He knows the system. So Mahmoud will be with me on this edition of the show, breaking it down as we analyze. Mahmoud Maman on State Affairs. The story of Ali Modu Sharif.
There can be no...
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
It is the question of the Almajiri. Who is an Almajiri?
The term Almajiri is an Arabic word meaning Al-Muhajirun. Muhajirun, these are set of people or companions of the prophets who left Mecca because of persecution at that time to migrate to Medina. Because at that time in Mecca, life was very difficult and his companions. So the directive was given from God Almighty, for him to migrate to Medina. So at that time, the people in Mecca gave a condition that whoever wants to go with the prophet should not carry anything, whether his family members, wealth, whatever. If you agree with this condition, then you can follow the prophet. So people sacrifice everything they have in the name of God Almighty and follow the prophet. So this category of people were called in Islamic context al-Muhajirun, those who sacrifice their comfort, their wealth, their families in the name of God Almighty. Then that good intention has been a practice throughout the Islamic history. Whenever somebody was saying leaves his comfort zone in search of knowledge, so it's also called al-Muhajirun, because the aim is the same thing. They left Mecca because of persecution, but in his own case, it's not because of persecution, but also in the name of God to go and seek knowledge. So whoever leaves his comfort zone in search of knowledge is called al-Muhajirun. Then later, al-Muhajirun became Almajiri, those children who we are seeing on the streets of northern Nigeria, roaming around. Gradually, the word was not abused because historically, almost everyone in particularly Borno State has attended Almajiri school.
Even Mahmoud was an
Of
Almajiri.
course, Mahmoud attended Almajiri school. Tijani, who is speaking, has attended Almajiri school. The governor, Babagana Umar Zulum, attended Almajiri school. He is still proud to be called Almajiri. Kashim Shetima, the presidential vice candidate for Bola Ahmed Tinubu, attended Almajiri school. So everyone attended that school.
How come you came out differently?
Good. That's where I wanted to take us to. And that brought the question of abuse. At that time, parents of those generations did not abuse the goal and objective of the Almajiris. There are two sets of Almajiris. Those who go to school, the Almajiri school, in the morning or evening, study in the school and come back to sleep in their parents' homes. And there are those who were taken to far places. Then their parents comes once in a while or in a specific time, which is known to the Malam and also the parent that in social time they must come and check their children. And there are public breaks, like during Ramadan, 1 month of the fasting month, and during the Eid Kabir, students also do go back to their various homes, various communities to spend those holidays with their parents. It's just like a boarding school and come back during the agreed time. So the connection between parents and their children is intact. As time goes on, that has been abused, where we have witnessed the influx of not only indigenous of Borno State, we have started receiving big number of the Almajiris from various states in the northern Nigeria, because Borno is known as a bank of Islamic knowledge in the West Africa. So those are categories of people who have started abusing the good intention. They started bringing their children from Kano, Jigawa, Sokoto, Zamfara, and they start abandon these children. And not only in Nigeria, like I said, Borno shares borders with 3 different countries: Niger, Republic, Chad, and Cameroon. So they also bring their own kids to Maiduguri, all in the name of Almajiri. Then there is no any consultation, there is no any visit, and the Malan cannot take care of them because he has no financial muscle to take care of 2,000 children. So then they now use that Almajiris to go and clear a very big farmland. The Malan doesn't bother too much whether the parents do come or not, because to him it's also another opportunity. So he can now clear a very big farmland. He can take them to the farm and they can farm for him. He can now have what to eat and what to sell. Gradually, these children have no place to sleep, have no food to eat, have no any access to health care. So gradually, if they start becoming, as they are growing up, they started going into different business skills, and in the process, anything can happen. So that's how we got it wrong.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
You just listened to Mahmoud Maman, a journalist covering the Lake Chad Basin. He will be with me, breaking it down. What you just heard is a lived experience of Mahmoud Maman. I had that talk with him in 2022. And everything he said is still fresh, as if he's talking about today. What are we looking at? The making of a monster. Almajiri, Shekau, and the war within. The objective is to create a better understanding of the violence that has engulfed Nigeria. So having broken it down, Mahmoud has opened a wider space for understanding the crisis of Boko Haram. What does that recruitment look like? When a child has no food, no shelter, no future, and a man comes offering a hot meal, a sense of purpose, what do you think that child would do? In that case, it's not about the child making a choice between good and evil. In that situation, the child is choosing survival. So the study in question reveals that the Almajiri system, rooted in Quranic education, often serves as a socio-economic coping mechanism for impoverished families who send their children away for free to get religious instruction, though many students residing full-time in Sangaya schools, and they are forced into streets begging to sustain themselves and their malams. Boko Haram exploits this economic desperation by offering Almajiri youth financial incentives, food, and a sense of purpose, often framing their ideology as a pathway to social justice and empowerment. Since the government cannot provide, those who sought survival will bend to where the fruit dangles. They've lost their minds. If you consider the geography of the insurgency, if you look at the work of researchers, you will find something. You would observe that almost all the insurgency that took place in Maiduguri were largely concentrated in poor neighborhoods. Poor neighborhoods within the city. Poverty is violence. For nations to rise, nations must tackle poverty. Tackling poverty is the rise of the human spirit. For nations to rise, the human spirit must rise. So when we talk about poor neighborhoods, we talk about neighborhoods where the Almajiri live, where they beg, where they were ignored by the state. And it is precisely in these neighborhoods that the insurgency found its foot soldiers, with some reports noting that youths were paid as little as 1,000 naira per episode to destroy, to take lives. Why did we allow it to happen? Why? Is it that we didn't see it coming? To every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It is the law of nature. What you sow, you reap. Nigeria has sown wind, and she is reaping wild wind. A body will continue in its state of rest, or if it is in motion, we continue to move with uniform speed in a straight line unless it is acted upon by force. You can break that down and use it to explain Boko Haram. That is Newton's first law. I welcome you to this class of history, politics and power. It is a class where I come to learn. What about you? In those poor neighborhoods in Maiduguri, that was what Ali Modu Sharif studied. So if you look at those neighborhoods and you look at the political ambition of Modu Sharif, the story becomes more interesting. Remember the words of retired General Jeremiah Oseni, who visited Maiduguri during Sharif's tenure and observed young boys selling petrol on the street. When Oseni asked Sharif why he allowed such a dangerous practice, Sharif replied, No, leave them. They are very useful during general elections. We can use them to turn everywhere. Those young boys Oseni saw were from the poor neighborhoods. They were the out of school, the unemployed, the disenfranchised. So what we see is that Boko Haram's core targets are the poor and alienated northern population, the roadside fruit seller and Almajiri boys, street beggars. They are hired to scout for security forces and to destroy. Ali Modu Sharif saw these vulnerable youths as a resource to be exploited. He used them for votes, then abandoned them when they were no longer useful. And when they turned to violence, he crushed them with the full weight of state security forces. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that this system has persisted for decades. Political elites from the region, after attaining political status and financial influence, often neglect the well-being of their communities and constituencies. This serves as a push for radical groups ready to provide for their daily needs. The Almajiri were abandoned by parents and the state, forced to resort to street begging for alms and survival. And this street life exposes the urchins to abuse. They are exposed to criminalization, and they are subsequently mobilized for violent causes, including terrorism. So what we find, having examined the situation, are recommendations. We'll come to that. But let's bring in Mahmoud Maman again. He will further break down the Almajiri system, providing a broader understanding of the issues. The program is State Affairs. How many Almajiri schools do you think are in Borno of the now, Borno of the moment?
The Borno State government now has inaugurated some committees previously, maybe 2 years ago, 2 years, I think, 2 or 1 year ago, I'm not very sure, but they inaugurate a committee to, first of all, let them know how many Almajiri schools do we have in Borno State. Because you cannot know what to do without knowing the exact number. So I was privileged to have an interview with the chairman hearing committee, Professor Abdul Karim Ishaq. He was telling me that they were able to find out more than 40,000 Almajiri schools in Borno State. And let me say something very important here. This number is even little because we have witnessed a lot of displacement in the last 6-7 years because due to the Boko Haram insurgency. So there are some villages that have been displaced. So initially there were Almajiri schools in those communities. So now they are not even part of the number that we are now talking. And there are places that are still inaccessible that the committee cannot access, cannot go. So they cannot even find the complete number of the Almajiri schools in Borno State alone. In Borno State alone.
So what is the average number of students in each Almajiri school?
I don't have the exact number of how many children, how many Almajiri schools we have, and I tried to even get that answer from him, but at that time the governor did not comment on the report. So he said he cannot reveal all the details of the findings because he don't want to be ahead of the governor in terms of saying some of the things. But just we can now imagine if we have 40,000 schools and we are saying in each school at least we have 200. At least we have 200. There are ones that you can have more than 2,000. But at least you have, so if you calculate 200 times 40,000, how many people do you think we are going to have? So that is, I think the government, they are attempting to do something, but I am not very confident at all.
So the point Mahmoud is making is that the Almajiri menace continues.
As we are speaking to you now, there is no any effort to curtail the supply or influx of Almajiri in Maiduguri. People are continuing bringing.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
If we want any adjustment, the first set of people that can help us to get out of this problem or disaster are Islamic scholars. Islamic scholars should take the lead because people always depend or rely on one of the hadiths of the Prophet. When we say hadith, that is the commandment from the Prophet that Muslims should give birth to children so that on the day of judgment, he will be proud of that he has more followers than any other prophet. Then people use that interpretation to be giving birth to children without thinking of taking care of them is also their responsibility. This is a misconception. This is misinterpretation. Prophet didn't say people should give birth to children that they cannot take care of. Yes, he has said people should give birth so that he will be proud of on the day of judgment that he has more followers. But who are his followers? Can he be proud with Boko Haram? So the question is, you should give birth only to children that you can take care of. And you know you are financial muscle than any other person does. Because you know if you are capable of taking care of 2, 1, or 10 children, you know better than anyone. So we must, and the Islamic scholars are the ones who will help us to correct that interpretation.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
Our dear country, Nigeria, is facing a new challenge. A war has been unleashed on us. Extremist foreign elements, collaborating with some of our misguided citizens, are focused on an attempt to bring down our country and the democracy and freedom we cherish and celebrate today. The despicable abduction of schoolgirls from Chibok in Borno State has brought to the awareness of the entire world the heartless brutality of these terrorists who want to instigate a descent into anarchy and balkanize our nation. In recent years, terrorist attacks have claimed the lives of several of our compatriots. Many have been injured or maimed. Whole villages and communities have been destroyed, and the economy of some of our states is in jeopardy. There can be no doubt that what we're witnessing in Nigeria today is a manifestation of the same warped and ferocious worldview that brought down the Twin Towers in New York, killed innocent persons in Boston, and led to the murder of defenseless people in the southern Russian city of Volgograd. Terrorist activities have brought war and pains to Mali, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. These agents of evil continue to brainwash and incite ignorant young men and women to attack the innocent. We cannot allow this to continue.
Mahmoud Maman educating us on the Almajiri system. That is Goodluck Jonathan as president of Nigeria, talking about Boko Haram. Buhari has done 8 years. Tinubu has concluded 3 years. The story remains the same. The Almajiri question. To explain it, we must also raise questions. What happens to a society that abandons its children? Do you know? What happens to a society that abandons its children? What happens when millions of young people grow up with no education, no skills, no hope, and no stake in the society around them? What happens? The answer is Boko Haram. The answer is an insurgency that has claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced millions. The answer is a generation of young men who saw no future except violence. The leadership failure behind this is alarming. As Chinua Achebe wrote decades ago in The Trouble with Nigeria, the problem is not the land or the people. It is the unwillingness or inability of its leaders to rise to the responsibility, to the challenge of personal example, which are the hallmarks of great leadership, Achebe concludes. Ali Modu Sharif embodied that failure that Achebe defines. Ali Modu Sharif was not just a bystander to this tragedy. He was the architect. His alliance with Yusuf legitimized the movement. His broken promises radicalized the movement. His brutal suppression transformed the movement into an armed insurgency. Though the signs were there. And Sharif's use and abandonment of vulnerable young persons created the very conditions that allowed Boko Haram to recruit an army of the disenfranchised. Should I say that the Almajiri question is the darkest chapter of Sharif's story? It is the story of how a political elite, desperate for power, created a system of exploitation that would eventually consume everything it touched. A system that produced a monster. You remember him? Abubakar Shekau? The man who inherited the rage. We have looked at the Almajiri system. We have defined it as the recruitment pipeline that allowed Boko Haram to grow from a small sect into an army of thousands. But every army needs a general. And the man who inherited Mohammed Yusuf's rage and transformed it into a global terror network was Abubakar Shekau. Born in the 1970s in Shekau village in Yobe State, he was an ethnic Kanuri whose parents were poor farmers. As a young boy, he studied the Quran at an Islamic school in Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State. According to those who knew him, he was an easygoing fellow who would exchange banter with people in the neighborhood. They said he was popular because of the local theology that he represented. Some who observed him closely said that his path to radicalization began when he enrolled in a higher Islamic studies course. There, he met Mama No. Remember Mama No? He would later mastermind the August 2011 bombing of the United Nations office in Abuja. That bombing took lives. It was Mama No who introduced Shekau to Muhammad Yusuf, Boko Haram's founder. By the time Shekau emerged as Boko Haram's leader, he had become a man who would later declare, "I enjoy killing anyone that gods command me to take out." He enjoyed doing that. When Muhammad Yusuf was killed in July 2009 during a military crackdown that left about 1,000 persons dead, Shekau became his successor. He survived being shot in the leg during the 2009 attempt on his life by Nigerian security forces and reportedly married one of Yusuf's widows. Why did he do that? Perhaps to preserve the group's cohesion or purity. So after he escaped that attack by the Nigerian military, the group went underground briefly. But Shekau soon re-emerged to take control and transform Boko Haram into a far more radical and violent organization. Under Shekau's leadership, Boko Haram turned large swaths of Nigeria's northeast into a no-go territory, proclaiming a caliphate in the Borno town of Goza in 2014. Remember that time? If you listen to Jonathan again, you feel the pain in his voice. Shekau was the cause of the pain of Jonathan in that broadcast you listened to. Under Shekau's leadership, Boko Haram routinely abducted, enslaved, raped civilians, and destroyed people and property. But Shekau's relationship with the Nigerian state was defined by a dance of death and resurrection. Repeatedly, the military declared him killed or fatally wounded. Repeatedly, he resurfaced to mock the military. In August 2013, the Joint Task Force announced that Shekau may have died of gunshot wounds received in an encounter with troops at Sambisa forest in June of that year. The military claimed he had been sneaked into Cameroon for treatment, but never recovered. In September 2014, the military again claimed that Shekau was dead, this time in an ambush in Konduga. Yet within weeks, a video obtained by AFP showed Shekau alive, mocking the Nigerian military's allegations. He appeared, "I am alive," mocking Nigeria's military's allegations. In August 2016, the Nigerian Air Force launched an airstrike on Tai village within the Sambisa forest. The military claimed that several Boko Haram leaders were taken out and that Abubakar Shekau himself was wounded. Hey, if you look at events as they occurred, you remember the theater commander of Operation Lafia Dole, when he reiterated that Shekau had long been killed, maintaining that the term was simply a title for whoever led Boko Haram. I can confirm to you that the original Shekau was killed, the second Shekau was killed, and the man presenting himself as Shekau, I can also confirm to you that a few days ago he was wounded. That's the story of the military. But within weeks, Shekau released a video in Arabic, Hausa, Kanuri, and English, flanked by gun-wielding fighters, making fun of the Nigerian government and swearing to keep fighting. The pattern was so consistent that a Nigerian minister would later remark, "You know my understanding of Shekau? Shekau may not be a real name. If you kill one Shekau today, there are hundreds that come to that place. Shekau." Some speculated that Shekau used body doubles. Others believed that he possessed an almost supernatural ability to evade capture. The United States Department of State placed a $7 million reward on his head, while the Nigerian army offered an additional $50 million. But for more than a decade, Shekau remained elusive. How did he operate? I have read different research works on how he operated. And if you look at it keenly, it explains his survival and downfall. Yes, for such a man, he could be mercurial. They say he was subject to quick temper. He was extreme and stubborn. And while he was the leader of Boko Haram, he was not ready to change. He is consistent in his ideal. He was unwilling to compromise. You know, this unwillingness to compromise is what led to the split within Boko Haram. We'll come to that. Shekau, as leader, encouraged brutal tactics, including the use of women and children in suicide bombings. Other militants within the movement didn't like that. They disapproved of it. Shekau did not listen. Shekau considered Muslim civilians who were not loyal to him to be legitimate targets, and he antagonized many other commanders with what they saw as the hoarding of cash in Boko Haram. He used the hoarding of cash as a weapon. He refused to share bounty with those he did not like or trust. He was creating division within his own movement. In 2016, senior Boko Haram commanders who disagreed with Shekau's tactics deserted his stronghold in Sambisa forest. A few months later, the leader of their faction, Habib Yusuf, a son of Muhammad Yusuf, was officially recognized as leader of the Islamic State's West African province, ISWAP. Shekau continued to lead his loyalists under the original name of JAS. But Shekau never fully renounced his allegiance to the Islamic State, ISIS. But he framed the rebels within Boko Haram as those planted to destroy the movement. In May 2021, the war between JAS, led by Shekau, and ISWAP, another breakaway faction of Boko Haram, reached its climax. Over 300 fighters loyal to ISWAP launched an assault on Shekau's base in the Sambisa forest. According to an internal message from ISWAP leader, Abu Musab al-Banawi, the interim leader of ISIS had ordered them to take action on Shekau for deviating and killing believers. Terrorists also fight themselves. There's war within Boko Haram. You want to join the discussion? Yes, you can join the discussion. You can call the number that will scroll on the screen soon. Yes, you can call that number. The number is on the screen. You can call the number to join the discourse. So the line is open now. The number is on the screen. That is 080 999 18449. That's Udara Books number. You can also chat with Udara Books on that number. If you are interested in books on politics and power, Udara Books is the place to go. Books on Nigerian civil war, autobiographies, biographies, history, Yoruba culture, the Igbo tradition. You find books on these subjects on udarabooks.com. What is happening around you? How do you view the political climate of the moment? Are you satisfied with the level of development in Nigeria? What vision of Nigeria do you have? Or you don't believe that Nigeria would work? Are you among those who feel that Nigeria will not work? Why do you feel that way? You can call, because from the story we've been tracing, it is a clear case of leadership irresponsibility in the name of power. And it has happened without consequences on the parts of those who triggered it. But somehow, Nigeria keeps standing. There must be something about the country, don't you think so? A country that has gone through several stages of political violence, military misrule, unimaginable corruption, yet the country remains so resilient, standing firm. There must be something special about the people of such a country. What do you think? A country at this moment facing violence in its 6 geopolitical zones. Yet, the citizens of that country, they move on as if what happened yesterday should be left to yesterday to handle. What are the genetic makeup of such a people? I was reading a report. The report of the International Crisis Group. I made mention of it on Tuesday on the show. Let me also see what you're saying. Okay, I can see some of us here. Ibiam Samuel, Abdulaziz Maila. Okay, you're recommending somebody to be interviewed on the subject. Obafemi Adinaike. How do you do? Obafemi says, but Jonathan was a bit weak as a president. He ought to have been very ruthless with those sponsors of Boko Haram. But the general came and could not also solve the problem. We thought Buhari as a general would deal with the problem. The violence escalated under his term. We thought Tinubu is the toughest of all, right? But he seems to have no hand on containing the violence. So, was Jonathan really weak? Or there's something systemic that makes leadership important in solving problems like this? I'm just thinking. Thank you, Obafemi Adenaike, for raising the point. I can see Rose Kate and Kiru watching. Thank you for joining. Bobby Omoba, thank you for joining the broadcast. I like the word broadcast. Podcasts. I prefer broadcast. The broadcast, you're talking to a broad audience. Broad audience. Podcast is almost narrow casting. Anyway, semantics. Looking at the report, let's turn to the report in this class of history, politics, and power. I want to turn to that report by the International Crisis Group. There's a lot to glean from it. So by this, we are turning to an organization that has tracked the Boko Haram insurgency with forensic precision for over a decade. It is the International Crisis Group. This organization, widely regarded as the world's leading source of analysis on deadly conflict, has produced a body of work on Nigeria's security crisis. So we're going to go through it together. Before we go into their findings, Let us know them. The International Crisis Group was founded in 1995 by a group of prominent concerned men who despaired at the international community's failure to anticipate and respond effectively to the tragedies of Somalia, Rwanda, and Bosnia. And let me remind you, this program is not only about the Nigerian question. It is a program that treats global issues. Someday I would like to treat Black Hawk Down. How Somali militants shot down America's Black Hawk helicopter in Somalia. Black Hawk Down. The rise of Al-Shabaab. So the International Crisis Group was founded in 1995. The founding was led by figures like former U.S. Senator George Michel, former U.S. Ambassador Morton Abramowitz, and Mark Mallock of the United Nations Development Program. The organization was built on the idea to create a highly professional staff that would serve as the world's eyes and ears for impending conflicts, and a highly influential board that could mobilize effective action from global policymakers. That's the mission of the group. Today, the crisis group is generally regarded as the preeminent source of information and policy advice to prevent and resolve deadly conflicts. Their work in Nigeria has been relentless. As early as December 2010, just months after Mohammed Yusuf's execution, Crisis Group published a report titled Northern Nigeria, Background to Conflict. The report warned that while Nigeria's far north was not the hotbed of Islamic extremism, remember at that time, 2010, the reports noted that the north was not the hotbed of Islamic extremism, but the north needed reinforced community-level peace building and a more subtle security response, lest lingering tension would lead to a new violence. Critically, the report identified that the roots of the problem lay in Nigeria's history and contemporary politics. Specifically, the report points at political manipulation of religion and ethnicity. The report talks about disputes over distribution of public resources and the failure of the state to assure public order. Can you see what led to Boko Haram? Let's go through it again. The report identified that the roots of the problem lay in Nigeria's history and contemporary politics. I want you to take note of that. That the roots of the Boko Haram problem lay in Nigeria's history and contemporary politics, specifically the political manipulation of religion and ethnicity. He also talks about disputes over distribution of public resources and the failure of the state to assure public order. This was a direct indictment of the kind of cynical deal-making that we've already traced on the show. Crisis Group has since produced a series of authoritative reports dissecting every twist in Boko Haram's evolution. In March 2024, the group published JAS vs. ISWAP, The War of the Boko Haram Splinters. Have you read that report? Find it. JAS vs. ISWAP, semicolon, The War of the Boko Haram Splinters. I recommend that report to you. It's online. Read it. What the report did was to examine how the original Boko Haram, now calling itself Jamal Suna Awati Wild Jihad, that is JAS, how JAS has been locked in a brutal internal war with its breakaway rival, Islamic State West African Province, or ISWAP. The report traced how the original Boko Haram emerged in the 20s, participated in the failed urban uprisings of 2009, and then reassembled under the leadership of Abubakar Shekau to evolve from an urban terror group into a rural guerrilla movement that seized control of substantial parts of Borno State. In 2015, Shekau pledged allegiance to ISIS, but internal divisions soon fractured the movement. By 2016, the faction that broke away secured recognition from ISIS and took the name ISWAP, while Shekau and his followers reverted to the JAS designation. The report revealed that the two jihadist factions have inflicted more damage on each other since 2021 than the Nigerian military has inflicted on them. How do you explain this? How do you break this down? The report revealed that the two jihadist factions have inflicted more damage on each other since 2021 than the Nigerian military has inflicted on them. You can see the toll that infighting is taking on Boko Haram. Should we say that's good for Nigeria? Let them take themselves out. Now let's look at this. The conflict between Shekau faction and Yusuf's son's faction explains the fundamental disagreement over how to treat civilians. The Shekau faction sees all civilians as fair game for plunder, while ISWAP treats Muslims differently from non-Muslims, taxing them and providing its version of law and order rather than simply stealing from them. When ISWAP took over territory from JAS and imposed this more bureaucratic model, banning pillage and seizing weapons, many JAS fighters refused to join ISWAP. They wanted a more radical movement. Some surrendered to Nigerian authorities, while others refused to join. Others fought back by creating their own system, and that led to JAS counter-offensive that has since retaken some of the islands in the Lake Chad Basin. So the report also captures the sheer scale of the humanitarian catastrophe. The insurgency has displaced more than 2 million people, created a massive humanitarian crisis, and prompted the rise of civilian vigilante self-defense groups. When you have self-defense groups coming up every day, it simply means there is chaos. And those self-defense groups will also begin to terrorize those they are supposed to protect. Because we are in a war situation. That is why we must be careful about the numbers of vigilantes that we approve. Because the system is volatile and chaotic, the likelihood of their misuse is there. That's why they must be properly educated, properly lectured on understanding of human nature. I want to bring you this interview with Mahmoud Maman. Mahmoud, I want to know more about Sambisa forest, what that forest is like. Have there been communities in Sambisa before the Boko Haram insurgency began?
Okay, thank you very much. We call it the Sambisa forest. It is a game reserve. Initially, it was a game reserve. Very big game reserve, and I think one of the biggest, among the biggest, if not the biggest in the whole of Africa. It's a very vast land, and the game reserve was abandoned for many years by different governments. So it was a very thick forest, and there are very fertile land. There are thousands of communities long before Boko Haram, living some close, some in the main Sambisa forest. And the forest can link also to different parts of the country. Because there is somebody who was telling me that one of my guests in one of my programs, he was telling me that the Sambisa forest can also lead. There is a route from Sambisa that you can also move to the southern part of Nigeria. There were communities living around and within the Sambisa forest long before Boko Haram made it their stronghold. And Boko Haram didn't make Sambisa forest their stronghold just one day. When they started their movement, they have planned for almost everything, including, because the movement was started in Maiduguri Metropolitan. So they have planned everything, including if they were chased out or overpowered by the military, where are they going, where will be their destination? So they prepare Sambisa, they made everything, they have their routes right from Maiduguri to Sambisa, so they know everything. And that was why when, in 2009, when they fought the Nigerian military for the first time, when they were overpowered, they easily moved to the Sambisa forest. They easily did that because they have already planned everything. It was a very thick forest with mountains And based on some of the ex-Boko Haram fighters or the surrendered in court, where I was able to interview, they told me, I was asking them, so why do you see military presence when you are in Sambisa? How frequent were you attacked by the military? They said very few, very rare, because the military cannot easily enter into the Sambisa forest because it was a very complicated place. And so I was asking, so if they cannot penetrate, if they cannot move with their vehicles, so they have their different military aircrafts, including the recent Super Tucanos. So how frequent do you see that? They said, yes, they have been seeing it from time to time, but they cannot recall how many times he has carried out any attack on them, because there are mountains that they can move into whenever there is the aircrafts are coming. So once they are in that mountain, under the mountains, no matter how the bombardment was, it cannot harm them. So it was a very strategic place, very strategic. And some of the security observers are even recommending that the Nigerian military should, once they take over Sambisa, should make it to become a military camp, because it was a very strategic, the place. So I think that is something that I can say about the Sambisa forest. There were communities before. When Boko Haram came, some of them were chased, some of them were held hostage. The people living in and around the Sambisa forest. And these are some of the people that we are now, the military and the Nigerian government is calling them Boko Haram members surrendered. These are the people, those who were there before Boko Haram, then they later came and took them as hostage and denied them access to live, because Shekau is a type of leader that cannot tolerate anything beyond his standard. So once you are escaping and you are caught, you will be killed. So many people were held hostages, and they became slaves, farming for Boko Haram, doing all sorts of things.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live. Mahmoud Maman is a journalist. I had that interview with him in 2022. Let's look at the war within Boko Haram. It is about human nature. The insurgency has displaced more than 2 million people. It has created humanitarian crisis, and it has prompted the rise of civilian vigilante self-defense groups. In a February 2026 update, the International Crisis Group documented how Boko Haram and ISWAP have gained momentum in recent months despite counter-insurgent operations by the Nigerian military. How do you explain that?
According to one estimate, Nigeria recorded nearly 12,000 conflict-related deaths in 2025 alone. That Boko Haram is rising. But the Nigerian state is also not relenting. And we must congratulate our soldiers on the battlefield. And for those who have lost loved ones who are part of the military, may you be consoled. It's never easy to say don't cry, because sometimes when I see these young officers, something just say, hey, who knows, tomorrow he might be no more. So, we congratulate the Nigerian military for fighting on, but we can do better. You can see that the terrorists are already in the southwest. The recent Uriri abductions remains bitter in our hearts. The terrorists are yet to release the children and their teachers. It is connected to Boko Haram. Let's look at what happened within Boko Haram. We have talked about the handshake with the devil in Maiduguri. We are analyzing the monster that Ali Modu Sharif helped legitimize in 2003 while he was running to be the governor of Borno State. So by 2026, that monster has grown so monstrous that it turned on itself. The political betrayal that radicalized Mohammed Yusuf's followers had now led to a civil war within the jihadist movement, a war that would ultimately consume the man who succeeded Yusuf as the face of terror. The war is the outcome of the rift that had long split Boko Haram. Following Abubakar Shekau's pledge of allegiance to ISIS in 2015, the movement fractured. Critics of Shekau's indiscriminate brutality, his willingness to massacre Muslim civilians, to bomb mosques, to enslave those he deemed infidels, broke away in 2016. To say, no, you can't lead us anymore. You are being too brutal. Are you saying terrorists have human feelings? So this breakaway group retained the name Islamic State West African Province, ISWAP, and they secured formal recognition from the Islamic State's leadership in Syria and Iraq. Shekau and his followers reverted to their original designation, JAS. The two groups were now locked in a battle for the soul of the insurgency and for territory. At the core of this split was a disagreement over how to treat people. It was the philosophy of a movement that had been betrayed and radicalized beyond reason. ISWAP rolled out a more bureaucratic and strategic approach, limiting violence against Muslim non-combatants and favoring taxation over stealing. So what ISWAP did was try to win hearts, trying to win the mind of the people. And how would you define such a strategy? Did it make them more dangerous, more sustainable, and more powerful? But the dispute was a prelude to war. By May 2021, ISWAP had grown powerful enough to launch its most ambitious operation yet, the conquest of Abubakar Shekau, the conquest of the man who inherited the rage of Yusuf, and they went to meet him in his fortress in Sambisa. The assault that ISWAP carried out against JAS was brutal. Fighters loyal to ISWAP, many trained in Libya, Syria, and Somalia, joined the offensive, armed with sophisticated weaponry, including RPGs and anti-aircraft guns. They launched their attack after weeks of mobilization, moving from strongholds around the Lake Chad Basin to converge on Sambisa from multiple fronts. They took Shekau unawares. The attack was led by two senior ISWAP commanders. They spearheaded the onslaught against the Shekau's faction. Reports indicate that the ISWAP fighters, many of them young and battle-hardened, surrounded Shekau and his remaining loyalists. According to the crisis group's account, when the news tightened, the notorious Shekau found himself trapped in the battle. Intelligence intercepted at the time revealed that an ISWAP fighter identified as Banner informed his logistics commander that the team had surrounded Shekau, and after a fierce exchange of fire, Shekau detonated a bomb and killed himself when he observed that they wanted to capture him alive. That is one story. There can be a modification of the story. An audio recording later released by ISWAP's leader, Abu Musab al-Banawi, confirmed the account, stating that Shekau preferred to be humiliated in the afterlife than getting humiliated on earth. Does that remind you of Adolf Hitler? When he saw that the world was coming after him, the Second World War, we learned that Adolf Hitler took his life. He could not imagine being arrested. Some of Shekau's commanders subsequently surrendered and pledged allegiance to ISWAP. The taking of Sambisa seemed to have signaled the end of Shekau's faction, yet it was in fact the beginning of a new and more chaotic chapter. The crisis group reports that JAS versus ISWAP, the war of the Boko Haram splinters, reveals that the two jihadist factions have inflicted more damage on each other since 2021 than the Nigerian military has inflicted on them. When ISWAP took over territory from JAS and imposed its bureaucratic model, banning pillage and seizing weapons, many JAS fighters refused to join. The irony is that the insurgency that began with Ali Modu Sharif's, a man who broke his promises now consumes itself in an endless circle of violence. Shekau, the man who inherited Yusuf's rage and transformed it into a global terror network, died not at the hands of the Nigerian military, but at the hands of his own jihadist brothers. Let's bring in Mahmoud Maman to break down this Shekau story. Mahmoud has a story to tell, and let's listen to his story. Did Shekau kill himself?
The initial report we have been receiving, and because up to now we are speaking till now, Shekau was killed in May last year. Now more than 1 year, we did not get any confirmation from the Nigerian military as expected. And we have no problem with that because we have expected that the Nigerian government, some of us that are on ground, that they will not comment on it. For a very simple fact, Nigerian government officially, they killed Shekau, I think, more than 5 times and injured him several times. But all this time, Shekau will resurface and release video to contradict the military. And that was why when this time around, it is the only time that Shekau was reported dead and not by the military. And the military cannot come out and say, yes, Shekau. They cannot come out and confirm, because if they do that, the society will ask them, so who did you kill previously? So Shekau, based on the report, the initial report is that he exhausted his firearms. He has no any bullets remaining. He fired all his bullets. He was running helter-skelter for his life until he was cycled by ISWAP. That was the information about his death that was released by ISWAP. They wanted to capture him alive. And when Shekau realized that he had a suicide vest already in him, then he exploded himself, deteriorated himself, and he exploded himself and committed suicide. That was the report that was on all the various researched documents that we are able to lay our hands and confirm and read throughout about the death of Shekau and how he died. But until just last week, I was able to interview one of the big Boko Haram commanders who led more than 60 wars, and he was also a driver of he was the one driving the armored tanker. He was a Boko Haram to the core from day one. He joined Boko Haram in Maiduguri and spent 9 years in Sambisa. He gave me a lot of information. He has confirmed to me so many things that I was looking for clarification for many years. He clarifies a lot of things, including the abduction of Chibok school girls. He knew them, he saw them, he took part in a lot of things. So he was the only person to give me different narrative about how Shekau died, apart from what we have been hearing, that Shekau exploded himself using a suicide vest. He said Shekau didn't kill himself. Shekau was shot with RPG gun by one of the ISWAP members. But ISWAP used that as a propaganda that Shekau killed himself to convince Shekau's followers to defect to their rank, because they believe that once you kill yourself, your destination in the hereafter is hell and forever. So they wanted to use that because they were only the ones present at that time So they gave that message, they spread that message to Shekau's followers to let them understand that even their leader, who they were proud of him, he was now dead in such a way that is not unaccepted, and he will be remaining forever in the hell. So you guys, this is clearly to show you that what he was doing is he was at the wrong path and we are at the right path. So I think also that answers provides some answers to how Israel invaded and how Shekau was killed.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
You can join the discussion by calling the number scrolling on the screen. The number on the screen. You can call that number to join the discourse. Adekoya Dave, thank you for being part of the broadcast. Thank you. Says this country is so large that there are many areas the government is unaware of, but it is inhabited by several people. It's an evidence of a weakened state. Umeoke, thank you for watching. Bobby Omoba said Buhari was old and lost discipline and direction by the time he became president. Okay. Discipline and direction. So that number on the screen, you can call that number to join the discourse. Let me hear what you've got to say.
Download Cleanup for free.
Okay, sorry about this.
Honestly, I don't understand why.
I'm trying to check. I know these videos come with adverts. Yes, to see your comments on YouTube. Trying to catch your comment. I can see on Nobamiru. Just want to see what you're saying. Good. Bonsa Edward. Hey, that's my guy. Okay, how are you? Reminds me of the good old days in secondary school. It's good to see you here. Your might says Almajiri system should be abolished. Extreme Islamic schools in the north should be closed and be replaced with Western technology-based schools. That is your might. It says the so-called educated Almajiris are more brutal than the folks in the forest. The elites provide the finance political backup and master plans for the foot soldiers in the streets to operate upon. That's what Yomite thinks. Omotayo Nobamiro says, hello Edmund. For nations to rise, the citizenry must have the best education and the right education, not like that of the Almajiri. And this right education will not fall from the skies. It is the people that will fight for it. So if they want it, they fight for it, unless they wait for a benevolent leadership to give them that education. For now, Nigeria is still in search of a benevolent leadership. Nigeria is still in search of a philosopher king as a leader, a man whose life or a woman whose life becomes an example for integrity, for innovation, for prosperity. Yes, we can. Fidel is saying, as long as Fulani elites control Nigeria, the status quo will remain. Fulani elites doesn't want any drastic progress in Nigeria until they complete their agenda, which is to completely dominate. But Tinubu is in charge. It's not the Fulani that is in charge. It's Tinubu, a Yoruba man. Because you were saying, as long as Fulani elites control Nigeria, Tinubu is in charge. Is he not in control of Nigeria as the commander-in-chief? I think he is. But the level of control he has can also be defined. Somebody just made a comment that there are ungoverned spaces in Nigeria. So having come this far, let's rehash the point we have made. Remember, this journey, this story began on Tuesday, and today is Thursday. When we started the story on Tuesday, we started it at the back rooms of Maiduguri in 2023. And that has led us through 2 decades of bloodshed, betrayal, and unimaginable suffering. We've examined the deals, the deniers, the recruitment of vulnerable children, and the bloody civil war that consumed the very monsters that Ali Modu Sharif helped to create. We began with Ali Modu Sharif's desperate pursuit of power, the handshake with Yusuf, the promises of Sharia law, the appointment of Bujifoy as Commissioner for Religious Affairs, and the exploitation of vulnerable young persons who would later become the foot soldiers of Boko Haram. So we've examined the damning evidences against Modu Sharif. On this edition, we have traced the rise of Abubakar Shekau, the man who inherited Yusuf's rage and transformed it into a global terror network. We've examined his encounters with the Nigerian state, how he was repeatedly declared killed or fatally wounded, only to resurface and mock his pursuers. And we have followed that bloody civil war in Boko Haram that ultimately consumed Shekau himself. So here, what did we see? the man who had eluded the Nigerian military for more than a decade, the man who had been declared killed or wounded at least 4 times, was finally brought down, not by the Nigerian state, but by his own jihadist brothers. But Shekau's death did not end the violence. The International Crisis Group February 2026 update documented how both Boko Haram and ISWAP have gained momentum in recent months. What happens to a society that abandons its children? What happens when millions of young people grow up with no education, no skills, no hope, and no stake in the society around them? The answer is Boko Haram. The answer is an insurgency that has claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced millions. The answer is a generation of young men who saw no future except violence. And now, Nigeria pays the price. The insurgency that Ali Modu Sharif helped set in motion has spread far beyond Borno State. The International Crisis Group identifies 4 main theaters of conflict: the Northeast, where Boko Haram resides; the Northwest, North Central, where criminal gangs frequently raid villages and schools; the North Central is also part of it. So, what should be done? In this case, it is not about more military operations alone. First, we must look at the Almajiri system and comprehensively reform or eradicate it if it's not useful. As the 2025 study recommends, there must be an integration of Islamic and Western education, compulsory schooling laws, poverty reduction, and strengthened security measures to address the root causes of insurgencies and promote national development. Nigeria cannot continue to abandon millions of children to the streets and expect them not to be radicalized. Second, there must be accountability. Sharif has never fully faced justice for his role in the Boko Haram tragedy. He has continued to hold political office, to wield influence, to deny his responsibility. But the weight of evidence from the International Crisis Group, from Borno State's own Attorney General, from retired generals and civil society, their findings tell a different story. There must also be a comprehensive approach to counterinsurgency that addresses the political, economic, and social dimensions of the crisis. Did you get me? There must be a comprehensive approach to counterinsurgency that addresses the political, economic, and social dimensions of the crisis. The Nigerian state must rebuild trust with its citizens, provide security and justice for all, and invest in the education and economic development of the Northeast. The story of Ali Modu Sharif is about a political class that has failed its people. It is a story about a system that rewards cynicism, that punishes integrity. It is a story about a nation that has yet to fully reckon with the consequences of its political irresponsibility. Do join us on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. for another edition of State Affairs. State Affairs runs on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 9 p.m. West African time. On Saturday, it runs at 8 a.m. West African time. Thank you for being part of today's broadcast. We appreciate you for always joining the stream. Until I come your way again on Tuesday, on Sunday, and Thursday, do not forget to join me on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. West African time. Bye for now.